work better. It helps you create a more mature threat model. And so I would take your problem with that, you got to have a threat model now. Okay, let's be honest, business has to happen and you have to get past your checkbox at some point, but you can also be proactive with it and continue to keep that model. That way when they come with a new feature, you're not stuck in that same spot again. You don't have to start from the ground up. You've already got something you've started building, and you can see how things might affect one another. Yeah?
Good question. Do you literally mean release cycle or do you mean development cycle?
I meant both. Because a lot of organizations don't really have a formalized SDL, but almost every organization has a release cycle. I like to think that they're basically two terms of the same thing, and SDL is a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more formal of a process. A lot of times it has more steps that have to go through because you have a more dedicated architecture phase or whatnot, and a more dedicated testing and QA phase. But a lot of release cycles already have, okay, we built the product and it goes to QA, then we have to release, and then you have to maintain. So I meant both. Yeah?
If you could only choose one place in an SDL to coincide a threat model, would you choose architecture or QA? Like an architectural review or QA review? If you're going to coincide.
I would have to pick the architecture review portion, especially as you introduce new features, because if you do find flaws, it's easier to remove them, because let's be honest, in threat modeling, it's design flaws, it's not implementation flaws for the most part. So if I had to pick one point at which that was my only touch point, I would pick architecture over QA.
So let's say that you did a threat model at the beginning of a release cycle. So now when the next release comes in, will you do it again, or will you just?
No, I'll use the one that I've got, and I'll make modifications to it. Again, I talk about this later, but it's great to do it in this fashion. A threat model should never be, where I said it was a living document, that means you keep maintaining it and you version control. You put it under version control, put it in your source code repository or something so that you can see how that it's changed over life if you need to.
And who do you think should be part of creating the threat model?
Anybody that asks what if. It is not a single person job, it's a team job. And you need to, the most effective threat models have an aspect of business, they have an aspect of architecture, they have an aspect of developer, they have an aspect of testing and QA. That's at a minimum. And you need those different perspectives because they will all look at your project from a different angle and want different things out of it. So the single guy doing a threat model, and I know how it ends up being because I've done several of them myself, it's a starting point. It really needs to be, in my opinion, more people involved than just one. I prefer to see most of the players in the team project being, having input into the threat modeling process.
When you talk about one person threat model, are you talking about the threat modeler, or are you talking about the team as a whole? Because if you're having the team ready to start doing the threat model, don't see a whole lot of value there unless they are well versed in security and can actually, do the mental gymnastics required to go through doing a threat model, figuring out where the threats are, figuring out the mitigation strategies, et cetera.
So you have to have a starting point, right?
Okay.
And that would be your threat modeler if you have to single one out. But making additions or modifications to a threat model, again, starts with what if, happens a lot of times when you get a group of people talking about, well, what if this happens? Well, we have this in place. And it's just a matter of recording those, the outputs of those sessions and incorporate, and where I said a threat model can be the story of your project, that's one of the places where you can add a chapter, so to speak. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have a slide about documenting things, but like a wiki, be a good place, the team wiki kind of thing.
A wiki'd be fine.
A living threat model.
Yeah, a wiki'd be fine.
This actually brings a whole other topic. That's with a complex enough system, your threat model runs out of date really quickly, and it's just another document, if you will, that needs to be QA. Right? It needs to be up to date. Otherwise, it's another template. It's not reflective of your system at all. Right? So if you have a wiki thing which is constantly changing, at which point how do you go checking dynamically changing document.
But isn't the opposite having a static document that doesn't change?
Yeah, but this is that we have revision control, on which state, at which point the threat model reflected which version of the software or.
Well, that's one of the nice things about wikis, though, is a lot of times they version the documents, and you can go pull up an old version.
It depends on how formal you want to be.
It depends exactly, yeah.
We wouldn't care about stuff like that. We'd just be happy to have something at all.
Yeah, no, the big thing is getting something down. I think that's the big thing. I like the idea of doing it in a wiki because it's a very dynamic and a living type of a document. And then if you do need to print it out, it's like, okay, well, PDF it, right? Yeah, I think I like the idea of doing it in a wiki better than a Word document. Okay, let's see, we'll jump into this. So there's also we've talked about when to start a threat model and how to maintain one, but there's also an aspect where you might want to not do one anymore. Maybe your project's gone end of life, and that's one place where you can stop. Or in some organizations, especially on internal tools, it's just we don't care anymore. I still don't recommend getting rid of it at that point because those we don't care tools tend to be relied upon for a long, long time, especially in very, very large organizations. And then you end up with somebody that, oh, I don't know who maintains that. We just use it. It's worked for years. And then you could be able to pull this up and see, and if there was a problem, you could see if there were issues that you could have somebody else pick up and take ownership of it a little bit more easily. Yeah.
You say when the project is end of life, are you talking about sunset application?
Yeah. If you're not going to make any more modifications to it and you're taking it off the your project off the market or out of production or whatever, you may not need to, I mean, you're abandoning the whole project, right? Essentially at that point, well, then you don't need a threat model. The idea is that while the project is alive, you should attempt to maintain your threat model.
But as long as the project is still in existence, you mentioned actually two scenarios. Sunset application simply means no more modification to my definition. My personal definition means that I'm not making any more modifications, but the application continues to be in operation, which simply means that you still have risk. Which means that as application being used, you have more users and you continue to have data, you still have more risk. Would that not be a case when you continue to monitor the system? Is that called continuous monitoring?
You could. So that's, I guess, a little bit different between sunset and end of life.
Well, end of life simply means you are going to turn off the application, take it off operational, production off, tomorrow, next week. That's really a real termination that you're talking about disposal with okay, that's what you're talking about.
And nothing I say here is set in stone either. So, I mean, it's going to vary based on, we talked about speaking the same language. This is another one of those places where the language might not be this. We may be meaning different things for the same words. So, if that gets back to when you don't care anymore, you obviously still care if you've sunsetted your project and it's still out in production and you have risks that you need to keep on top of it. So you're still caring about your project, and I would recommend absolutely keeping your threat model going if you identify new risks to the application. We covered participation a little bit in a question. This is the list of the high levels of the ones that I like to see always participating in a threat model. The top one, I think, is maybe the most important one because a lot of times they've already gone through in their head a lot of the what ifs, how's this going to affect, they've come up with what this is supposed to be doing. And then, of course, the project owner should always be a part of it because they're guiding where the project is going. Architects have a different insight. Sometimes some of these people are the same people, too. But this is the big one. Anybody that says what if on that's part of a project, or even maybe outside, it might be your customers do a what if that you didn't think of before, that input should still be able to go into your threat model. Yeah?
I think one category that we miss often, and I think it's a critical category, is implementation team. Because
Okay, yeah.
I think your products, as they're implemented, there's a variety of ways to do it. And if you don't understand how your team is doing
I absolutely agree with you. Yes?
How do you include the infrastructure? You want to include the data center?
I think that goes towards what she was saying about implementation teams.
Not always, but yeah, that's what you want. That's the same.
And then I didn't include, let's see, who else? No, I think I got it. Those are the ones that I meant to hit anyway. Anybody else got any ideas? We've got the infrastructure team that I didn't hit, that I didn't have on this slide, which I'll have in the next version. And anybody else that you can think of that might need to have input into a threat model? It could, yes. It does, yes.
What about business analysts?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe it's your audit and compliance teams, as what the previous talk up here was talking about, or maybe it's a manager level position of some sort. I mean, your project managers, sometimes they do more than just deal with Gantt charts. So I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Also, not all teams have security experts on them, so if you can have one participate, that would be great. But if not, at least review it later. Do a security review of that.
Yeah, when I was making this slide, I was thinking of just the project team, but in a lot of SDLs now you have your security champion as part of your organization. They would absolutely be in this process as well. Yeah.
What your support team, if you've got those teams for people that maintain your product, is customer facing for that product?
They're going to be mostly involved after release, but that's still an effective time.
They're
Yep.
often more what is, not what is.
I mentioned that I mentioned your customers having input if they come up. That would be more where that comes out, I think, most of the time, but not always, because they're also going to run into some of those situations that they might what if based. That's not quite what the customer said, but based on something that they've had to deal with.
Maybe first kind of real experience with what if.
Correct.
Sky with
And that doesn't really change whether it's an internal project or an external project. You had a question.
Yeah, how do you focus, I mean, this is a diverse group of people.
Yes, it is.
A lot of these people, we were talking about the idea of some of them don't have security practice or understand security practice, right?
Uh-huh.
But when we do threat modeling with a large team of people in my organization, we often have the threat model really surrounds the project itself and the threat to the project, but not the threat to the application as an ecosystem. And that becomes
That's
a
a
problem.
different threat model.
Yeah, and that becomes a problem because it seems to be overloaded because everyone's got the project on their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, well, what if we don't get the servers in time? What if we don't get the hardware in place? What if the user acceptance testing fails? What if, and there's all this stuff, right?
So
it's always.
I get that very much, and I've been in those situations.
Sure.
For your actual application, those would all be, external dependencies or whatever, right? But it's important to recognize, somebody needs to recognize that you're straight off and you're not actually doing what this work is, you're doing this work over here. Not, both of those pieces of work may be entirely valid. And in fact, with project management, they do a lot of the timing of servers or deliveries or whatever. That happens a fair bit, but it's a different model, and I think it's important to be able to recognize that. But it's also a gut check, right? You gotta have to have somebody actually realizing that you straight off. So it's a risk, and it's not one I have a very good solution to right now.
Yeah. So it might be the person leading the threat modeling exercise might want to just keep everyone on track about
Yes.
the threat model being an application-wide threat model. And I guess there's no really easy way to explain what that is to those people that are sort of hired in the project.
Right. Well, you did a lot of that just going towards saying you're worried about the project, not the application. And by pointing that out, you are recognizing that so it's good to be able to point that out, and I think even just mentioning that will put a lot of people back on track. And maybe it's another meeting that has to be scheduled because we all love those, right? And we've talked about this a little bit on how to